There are some people that say, yeah, so we have climate change, that's disappointing, there'll be less almonds and it'll be a little hotter. They're not understanding the connection of what you're saying. So what are the implications of climate change? In other words, for a person who lives in the United States in an affluent area where they have a lot of good things, they drive a car, they go to the supermarket, there's water, there's food, everything's good. What are the implications? Because even when California has a water shortage, they still have water. It hasn't actually happened where they've run out of water. So what is the actual potential implications if, that would affect regular life in the United States from continued ignoring of climate change? What are the things that would affect people? What would be? What would it be?
Well, I'll start on the water point, Steve, since you alluded to that. You said in California there's still water, even though there's climate change and drought taking place. In truth, every drop of water that runs across the surface in California is being fully consumed unless there's a very, very strict enforceable law saying that you can't take any more, like the Endangered Species Act, for example. In truth, what California has done over the last few years has gone and raided the savings account of the water that's stored beneath the surface of the earth, groundwater aquifers. They have very, very rapidly depleted their aquifers in trying to make up for the fact that their need for water, their demand for water, is higher than what the rivers can provide, what that annually renewable, replenishable water supply can provide. Now, in terms of just, some of the consequences, I alluded to them before, but this is really coming to bear in when you end up in that situation where there's too much competition for the available water supply, somebody ends up coming up short. And it's not always predictable as to which sector or which individuals or which companies are going to end up being short, but it is having effects on just about all of the things that we depend upon in our lives. It is having a big effect on crop production. We're having massive decreases in crop production, agricultural production, which is sending off price spikes that are affecting a lot of the poor economic members of our society, and especially in other countries. And that's one example. There are places where, because we don't have enough water to generate electricity, they're having rolling blackouts. There's some cities like Addis Ababa in Ethiopia where, on average 4 days a week, there is no electricity available to them. And it's largely because they don't, oftentimes it's because they don't have enough water to run their power plants, to run their hydroelectric power dams, and that sort of thing. So these are really, really very real consequences, and they're affecting lives, they're affecting local economies, and they're affecting natural ecosystems. Because we're taking so much water out of those sources, we're leaving the plants and animals that depend upon wet places, wetlands and rivers and lakes, we're really compromising them as well. And so we're seeing a lot of species disappear as a result of this as well.
If you look at the US, because it's so large, unfortunately you get all the effects of climate change. So we've talked about the droughts in California, but of course in August we had huge floods in Louisiana. And we know from sort of NOAA's study that these floods in Louisiana are going to be twice as likely in the future. And the problem with floods is the flood water doesn't go, oh, no, I'm not coming here because that's a rich neighborhood. I'm just going to the poor neighborhood, okay? The water will go where the water goes. So the problem is it affects everybody. And we also have, again, in the US, you have, of course, storms rolling in, you have hurricanes, and we know that over the last, say, 4 decades, the storm intensity and the numbers have started to creep up. Now, again, what's interesting there is actually the biggest problem is not the increase in storms, it is the change in society. And this is what Roger Pilk Jr. talks about, which is what happens in America is that you work hard, you have very small holidays, you put all that money aside and you retire. And then you decide you're going somewhere nice. So you move to Florida, you have a coastal property, and you live the retired life you want to. right in Hurricane Alley. So what we're doing is, over the last 4 or 5 decades, not only are storms increasing, but we're moving to the places which are at risk because they have fantastic coastlines, and that's where we want to live. And so again, sometimes society and climate change are starting to clash. And again, we need to think these things through. Look at Hurricane Sandy hitting New York. Now, we know that hurricanes quite regularly hit New York. One of the real problems with geography, and I am in a geography department, is I can tell you, and this is unfortunate, which is hurricanes hit the Gulf of Mexico. They hit the Florida coast and the Carolinas. They don't hit Washington, okay? Just because of the quirk of how the turn of the country, no hurricane has ever hit Washington. They just pass by and hit New York, okay? So unfortunately, you have put your capital where it's safest, which is most unfortunate, because I reckon if you get one good hurricane in Washington, lots of the things about climate change would change very, very quickly.
Maybe Brian can talk a little bit about saltwater intrusion. A really, really minor increase in sea level rise has great impacts in terms of drinking water in places like, Miami Beach. Can you talk about it?
Right, yeah, thanks, guys. So this idea of saltwater intrusion is that on the coastal areas where you have underground water, it's sort of the underground water, the underground fresh water and the ocean water are sort of, pushing at each other and in fact keeping each other largely at bay. But there are two things going on that are affecting that sort of dynamic equilibrium of push and pull between salt water and fresh water. But let me start by saying, this is important that tension exists and that the fresh water is able to resist the salt water from coming in because we depend upon that fresh water. We stick groundwater wells down in it and we rely upon it for our water supply. So thank goodness there is, some physics and chemistry going on that keeps those two bodies of water separate from each other. But that balance is getting changed because of two things. One is that we're pulling groundwater out of the aquifers faster than it can be naturally replenished, so already that level's going down. And then salt level, the ocean level, is rising. And so what that change in that relationship causes is for the salt water to move inland, and as it moves inland, it starts to cause what were once freshwater aquifers to become salty. And they become too salty to drink really quickly. I think I saw the statistic or the story recently that it's like a tablespoon of salt in a bathtub can make it unpalatable to drink. I mean, it's something on that kind of order. It's remarkable how little salt it takes to contaminate a freshwater source and make it undrinkable, unpalatable. So we have to be really, really mindful of that changing, and because of those two factors, we're seeing that unfortunately happen, that a lot of groundwater wells are now having to be abandoned, once freshwater wells having to be abandoned because the salt is intruding, the ocean water is intruding into what was once fresh water.
And this really matters from an adaptation perspective. Miami Beach, which is a pretty wealthy neighborhood, is, as I understand it, changing their building codes to require higher ceilings, thinking that when sea level rises, they'll just pour an extra 3 feet of floor with concrete and be up above the sea level rise. Well, they're completely ignoring the two most important factors about sea level rise: storms, storm surge, and saltwater intrusion into the freshwater system. So if you don't have any water to drink, I don't care how big the stilts on your house, you're still not going to be happy.